All right, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. We have Thomas Phifer lecturing tonight. We also have one more lecture coming up next Thursday, November 17th, Todd Gannon. So please come out for that. And anyone who wants to get AAA credits, come see me. And you need to give me your number, or you can email me. That can also work. I want to invite up David Polson from CannonDesign, who is sponsoring this lecture.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's been a while since I've introduced the CannonDesign Lecture, so I'm happy to be back in Steinberg Hall. I have the unique perspective of having been there at the start of the series of the CannonDesign Lecture for Excellence in Architecture and Engineering. I've been with the firm for 24 years now. And the brainchild of this lecture series was actually Susan Bauer, who probably many of you know, certainly somebody who's deeply embedded in the St. Louis design community, and she was a one-time colleague of mine. And the mission then, as the mission is now, is simple: to bring the best, most influential architects and engineers to the Sam Fox community of students and faculty, and also to the broader design community of St. Louis. So we have had the honor over many years to sponsor Pritzker Prize winners like Tom Maine, Rafael Mineo, but many others, Monica Ponce de Leon, Todd Williams and Billy Chen, engineers like Cecil Balmond, and so I'm very pleased this evening to add Thomas Phifer to that list of CannonDesign lecturers here. Thomas is a consummate architect's architect, I would say, and everything you touch is gold, from the tectonic clarity and lightness of the Clemson College of Architecture to the bold austerity of the U.S. Courthouse in Salt Lake City, to the quiet inward forms of the Glenstone Museum. So welcome. It's an honor to host you, and I'm going to turn it over to Robert McCarter to give a much more in-depth introduction on your life and work. Welcome all.
Good evening, and thanks again very much to CannonDesign for the sponsorship of the lecture. I've known Tom for a very long time, so you may have to suffer through a little bit of a more lengthy introduction, but I hope it might be enlightening. Tom Phifer is one of the most accomplished awarded architects of his generation, and he will be presenting to us built works and projects that will be considered canonical in both contemporary and future assessment. As the audience this evening is made up largely of architecture students, I would like to begin my introduction with Phifer's beginning. Tom Phifer grew up in South Carolina, Colombia, and received his Bachelor of Architecture in 1975 and his Master of Architecture in 1977, degrees from Clemson University in Clemson, South Carolina. And after graduating, Phifer worked for a number of years with Harry Wolff, then the most important design architect in North Carolina. The constructive impact of the time with Harry Wolff can probably hardly be overestimated. In particular, the work that they did together on the NCNB Tower, North Carolina National Bank Tower in Tampa, Florida, a cylindrical volume that sits above a garden by Daniel Urban Kiley, the greatest landscape architect in the United States at that time, in my opinion, resulted in a masterpiece of spatial design with a cylindrical tower, a pair of cubic banking halls, and a woven garden over a parking garage, all organized with rigorous engagement of proportions and scale and material and detail. It was during this period that Harry Wolff moved his practice to New York City, and once the Tampa building was complete, Phifer worked first, I believe, for Charlie Guafme. He's going to agree with me or not. I have to fact check some of these things. It's been a while. And then, starting in 1985, I believe for Richard Meyer and Partners. Phifer soon became a partner and the lead designer in the New York office. During the extremely productive 10-year period in Meyer's office, Phifer was design partner on such projects as the Rochevsky House in Dallas, which is now a public museum, the Hague City Hall and Central Library in Den Haag, the Netherlands, Canal Plus headquarters in Paris, France, the Barcelona Museum of Contemporary Art, Barcelona, Library of France competition entry, which I commend to you, Hyperlux Bank building in Luxembourg, and perhaps most notably the Islip Federal Courthouse building on Long Island, New York, as well as shortly thereafter a very different courthouse, the Phoenix Federal Courthouse building in Phoenix, Arizona. A pivotal moment occurred in 1995 when Phifer was awarded the Rome Prize in Architecture at the American Academy in Rome, Italy, which involves a year's residence there. In 1977, Phifer established his own practice, Thomas Phifer and Partners, in New York City. Among his notable works, in particular early on, are the Tagahanek House in New York of 1997, which is, I would say, a remarkable debut project. The Millbrook House in New York of 1999, the remarkable North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, 2001, Salt Point House, New York, 2004, Fisher's Island House, New York, 2004, Iowa House in Des Moines, not so far from us, in 2004, the Brochstein Pavilion at Rice University, Houston, which is the student, kind of a student center on the campus as part of the landscape, really, more than a building. 2005, Lee Hall School of Architecture renovation and addition at his own school, Clemson University, 2009. Phifer last lectured at Washington University, we were comparing notes today, in 2010, which actually coincided with the publication of the comprehensive first monograph on his work, Thomas Phifer and Partners, which was published by Schirra Rizzoli that same year. Since that time, he has realized a series of remarkable designs, including United States Courthouse in Salt Lake City, the Corning Glass Museum in New York, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, Poland, and the Glenstone Museum in Potomac, Maryland, so which I hope we will see today. In addition to awards for his designs that are literally a little bit too numerous for me to even mention, culminating, I would say, though, this year in his being made a lifetime member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Phifer has taught regularly since establishing his practice, most recently at the Cooper Union, twice at Yale University, where he held the Bishop visiting professorship and the Lewis Kahn visiting professorship. Also Cornell University, Columbia University, University of Southern California, University of Texas Austin, and University of Pennsylvania. But all of this does not really touch on what it is that makes Tom Phifer's works so significant and worthy of study. Phifer practices architecture as the most demanding of disciplines, taking the responsibilities that come with designing spaces where the lives of others will take place with the utmost seriousness, combining astonishment and precision. In his buildings, the design and form defer to the experience of light and material, so that what stands forth is not the architecture, but the actions and events that take place within it. Phifer's respect for the craft and construction is ever evident, and his works are detailed in a way that lets the material and light of the place come forward into presence. In the precision of Phifer's works, I am reminded of Adolf Loos's statement that we talked about this week in my seminar, that this is Adolf Loos, in the section, 1 millimeter more or less hurts me, in terms of precision. A similar understanding of the importance of proportion, measure, and material was reflected in the story that Phifer told me in 2012 of visiting the Roosevelt Memorial on the southern tip of Roosevelt Island, realized that year to the 1974 design of Lewis Kahn. The 36-ton blocks of North Carolina granite, which are 6 feet by 6 feet by 12 feet tall, were hoisted into place from the river barges and set precisely 1 inch apart, the 1 inch gap between being made of polished surfaces to reflect the light. Phifer told me that he measured all of the granite blocks and the gaps between them, and was deeply impressed with the precision of the construction, where he found the largest deviation in the size of the gap to be less than a 1/16 of an inch. This respect shown to both the original design intention of Kahn 40 years before and the contemporary construction execution that typifies the thinking and making of Thomas Phifer. Phifer makes places where space, light, and material are ordered precisely to the nature of the experience and events that they house, where the form recedes and the human actions taking place come forward, and where architecture may be said to reach the level of art, an art of inhabitation. It gives me great pleasure to give you and introduce Thomas Phifer.
Thank you, Robert. That's so nice of you. That's a little bit embarrassing, the story about Lucan's memorial, measuring, and I guess it's true. It's so nice to be here, and I certainly remember the last time I was here, because I loved this ceiling, and so it's nice to be back. This is an image of our studio. We've had this long table in the studio for a very, very long time for most of our practice. And our whole office sits around it. We've hovered around 21, 22 people. And we all sit across the table. We're not particularly organized in teams. We kind of shift people around. So people are moving constantly around the office. There's some small conference tables behind, and we really communicate, I think, as a family. This is part of our real kind of collaborative spirit as an office. I think this is a real treasured experience to be at this table every day. COVID kind of made it a kind of a tough moment, and we're having a hard time getting people back to the office 5 days a week. Hopefully over the next year we can get everybody to kind of begin to create the experience that we're so accustomed to here and so spoiled by. Tonight I thought it'd be interesting to talk about 4 museums that kind of trace our thinking about light and materiality and experience, starting with North Carolina, moving to Corning, moving to Glenstone, and then a project that's under construction right now, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. We're doing a theater there too, which I'll touch on a little bit. So to start with, the North Carolina Museum of Art, I don't remember the precise date that we started that. It was a long time ago, meaning maybe 2005, something like that. And, you know, I walked into the older building that was on the site by Edward Durrell Stone. It was a building that was completed after his death. He had it made in marble, plenty of light, windows to the landscape. They took all the windows out, they took the skylights out, and they made it in brick. And so that building housed an amazing collection of works, in particular this one that I loved to come and look at every time we'd come to a meeting. I'd rush downstairs and look at this gold painting, this Giotto. And it was the thing that began to inspire. This was the first museum that we worked on. We wanted to bring that painting into the light. And luckily for us, I think, the first museum is in this park, 130 acres of land. You can see the Edward Durrell Stone building that's right there below it in the upper left. And our addition is there. And they connect around that carcourt. One of the first studies we made, because this was a unique museum. They don't charge admission. It's free. So you can come and go here without going by the front desk, without purchasing a ticket. And because all of this land was here, we wanted, after a lot of discussion, after sitting on the site for a long time, rather than having one front door, we wanted to have 5 front doors, so that you could come in the park, come in the museum, and leave, and make your experience about the gardens, about the open park, about the light in the gardens, and weaving that together with the experience of this extraordinary collection, this kind of encyclopedic collection. And of course, we looked at the Louisiana. We went to visit the Louisiana, and this kind of symbiotic relationship between the landscape and the light and the art. It couldn't be any better than at the Louisiana. The architecture kind of drifts away if you've been there. And you focus on the art and this extraordinary setting and the light as it moves during the day. And so we made a couple of early decisions because, you know, we didn't have a lot of money here. This was a state project there. And so we wanted to put the focus on the landscape. And we wanted to make a one-story building so that we could make this museum about the light. And so we have 75,000 square feet in this one-story building, where every moment of the experience inside is about modulating and tuning this daylight to the experience. And from there, we made these gardens that reach out as these vestibules as you enter, as you come and go. One of the first things I saw as a student when I went over to England in 1976, this Dulwich gallery by Sir John Soane, and it really, I didn't know until North Carolina about how to use this experience there. But you walk into this place and the daylight is amazing. It's extraordinary. And I remember being in here as a student, and it was a bright sunny day, which was unusual in England. And a cloud went overhead, and all of a sudden, I was a little bit taken aback because the whole character of that room dimmed. And that really stayed with me. And as we began to start on North Carolina, began to look at this section again and how John Soane took the light from way up top and gave it some distance to fall so that by the time it got to the pictures, by the works, by the sculpture that was housed in these beautiful rooms, it began to soften. And he didn't screen it very much. He didn't louver it very much. Didn't have a lot of scrims. So it was pretty raw, pretty authentic daylight. And so we began to think early on about these coffers and about trying to design a coffer that would push the light a little bit like Sir John Soane did with these kind of pitched ceilings, to design this coffer in a way that would push the daylight over to the walls and would take this oculus with a skylight above it and begin to send this soft daylight down to the pictures. And we found that those units, we had to work with these on a budget. They were in those years about $3,200 a piece, pretty economical. They spanned 24 feet. And so we put them up here. They were cast. And all you did was sand them a little bit and you painted them. And they were ready to go. We studied them in model form. We studied them on the computer because we didn't want any shade and shadow as the light was beginning to come in. So that was a big test. We built full-scale mock-ups on site to make sure that these coffers were going to spread the light in the space. And so this is what we call the alligator mouth drawing here. And it just shows the organization of the different precincts in the museum that all have an experience with gardens and with daylight from above. And the roof, this continuous roof of, I think, something around 350 coffers that are up there that push this light to the art and to the works on the floor. And so each one of these gardens has a particular collection. This was the Rodin collection, which Larry Wheeler, the director, got about a year before we opened. And so we organized this garden with these Rodins in it and this bamboo. And these gardens are lined with glass. They glow in the winter evenings. They become these vestibules and these portals into the museum. So it's about, there's that Giotto in the distance. Each one of these places in between the coffers up above are used for a lot of the devices. We have track lights there. Those track lights were modulated to the dimension between the track light and the art. We have smoke detectors up there. We have cameras up there. We have a lot of the devices that you would see organized along those splines. And some of the spaces are very open, but none of the spaces have four corners. It's like a pavilion. And one of the great things that Larry Wheeler did is he pushed all the curators towards making an all-white interior so that the American works, the European works, the Egyptian works, the contemporary works, they all live in the same space together. And you can mark time. And you can mark people's lives. You can mark artists' lives with this even, beautifully white background. And it was one of the things that set North Carolina apart. Everyone put these European pictures on purple walls, on blue walls. They were seen in their own context. And Larry had the courage to put these works simply in this sameness, in the light. And so then from there we moved to the North Carolina Museum of Art. This was a little bit after we started to work on Glenstone. So Glenstone was next, and I'll show that next coming up. But here we go to Corning, New York. And this was an amazing commission to receive because we had never worked in a museum where the works were glass. And we didn't really know what these properties were. And it was funny, before we went up for the interview, we spent a little bit of time out on Varick Street in Charlton, where our office is, and we took a little simple alto vase out on the street there, and we tried it out in the light, because we didn't really know much about glass in that setting. And all of a sudden, that little alto vase that we had in the office on our table, all of a sudden this alto vase just came alive. And we kind of, we were a little bit taken aback. And we were curious about that, about how these glass objects could understand the true nature of that material in the light. And that was this sense of curiosity that we began to have as we started the museum project. Here we are in this world where we have Laurie Hawkinson and Henry Smith Miller. There it is. Whoop. Boy, I'm not good at that. Laurie Hawkinson and Henry Smith Miller right here. And we've got Gunnar Burkitz right here. And some wonderfully historic, older contemporary buildings that are right there, that have been there since the 50s. And our addition was right here as a way of closing this loop that was inside the museum. Very simple kind of building for contemporary works that they had really not had the space for. And then this renovation of their former factory building that was there, that was also built in the 50s as their new Glassworks auditorium. And so then, to prove it, we always, and we did this with the North Carolina Museum, we always work with Ova Arup, because daylight is certainly poetic, but it also has to be tuned and understood as something that is kind of scientific. And so we work with them to understand on every day of the month what the light levels are going to be, where the light's coming from, what the properties of that light are. And so we really rely on them to begin to show us. And so we immediately, after we received the commission, we immediately went over and put a piece of glass in their computer model. And it did exactly what it was doing. I don't think Ova Arup had ever seen anything quite like this. They put this glass object in their computer, and it did exactly what it did on Varick Street. It kind of exploded there. And so this was the track that we went on. And then we began to talk to the curators at Corning. And we learned that daylight doesn't harm glass in the way that it harms paintings or sculpture. But temperature and humidity does harm glass. So it gave us this clue that we could push as much light into this building, into this experience, to begin to move towards these properties that we loved. And of course, one of my favorite artists, Ronnie Horn. I don't know whether you all have ever experienced her work or not, but you've got to see it. This is pink tons. It's a solid block of glass. And it is this work that comes alive in the light. So not only did we look at this as a way of understanding what properties light has with glass, but we also saw it as a metaphor for the building itself, for the architecture, as a way that this room that we're making needs to hold light. It needs to embody the light. It needs to be the light. And so Ronnie Horn, we had this image pinned up for a long, long time. And so here it is, these more historic buildings around the edges, Gunnar Burkert's, Laurie and Henry, right here, this green landscape, and then there's our building. Very, very simple. These are the works of contemporary art. These are the works of our time. And so they're in this white volume, this optimistic place where it's about the works that are being done that represent us. And it sits very simply on that lawn. And so once we thought about these works with this light that gets pushed from the skylights above, we also then began to look inside at how these works were to be shown, were to be exhibited. Spoke a long time with the curators, and most of them, 95% of them sit on the floor. And so we immediately thought of making these, rather than these rooms that have corners, that have orthogonal walls for pictures, we thought about making these very soft rooms. These rooms seemingly without these defined corners on the rooms, so that they're like, we began to, kind of get out these images of clouds and these images of fog, and, in the way that these would land in rooms with the light that would be very soft. So that these objects that would sit on the floor would be the star of the show. And this was one of the keys to the project. We used the structural engineer, Guy Nordenson. And we have these very, very thin beams that are in the ceiling. In some cases, they span 60 feet. They're about 4.5 inches thick, and they're 5 feet tall. And they're made in the wilderness in Canada. And we couldn't find anybody to do anything like this. I don't know exactly what we would have done. And then all of a sudden we went to Canada. These guys said, yeah, we can do it. Look at this. Look at that beam. You can't find one that's out of plumb. It was a remarkable technical achievement to build these. And so they sit there underneath these skylights. And we have some panels that are solid, some panels that are frosted glass, which makes up about 85% of them. And then some pieces of glass that are clear, because that clear light, the clear panels, let direct rays of sunshine come in, because light doesn't affect or damage the art. We put all of the artificial lights up there, and they then move over these curved walls. And so here's a wall section there, and you can see they were sized so that we could get a lift up there to work on the sprinklers, work on the lights, work on the smoke detectors. Everything was up there. And then we've got these serpentine kind of solid walls, and the solid walls serve 3 purposes. Number one, they take all the structural loading, meaning not only the vertical loads, the loads from the roof, but they also deal with all of the lateral loads. So that all of the loads from the facades, all the loads from the skylight, they come into these beams and then into these walls. These walls operate like core walls of an office building. But we also put the air in there so that all the air comes up, it comes out of the top, and it returns in the soffits at each one of the portal entries. And so we were able to really let these walls and these beams be in service of the light. And then these rooms do have, at the entries, they have these kind of merging of these forms, and they come together. And not only were the beams built beautifully, but they found these remarkable plaster folks from upstate New York, and they plastered these concrete walls perfectly as these walls wanted to be soft with the light coming down on them. They wanted to have that sense of perfection there. And so then when you look out onto the green and look out on the beautiful Wally Harrison buildings that are there, we wanted this vitrine, this wide glass vitrine, to come down over this very simple glass vitrine. And so the one big vision window, we have other windows, but this one big vision window is made out of frosted glass so that you feel the layer of this vitrine. It's not clear. You feel the layer and you look through this filtered light and this garden through this lens of this vitrine. And so there's Wally Harrison's. This is one of the first curtain wall buildings. It was, of course, built in Corning, New York. This black glass building that's made with these beautiful rubber gaskets. Remarkable building, and our building sits right across the way from theirs. There it is, just as construction is beginning to finish. And so now we'll move to the Glenstone Museum here. That was quite an experience for us. I think this was a real turning point for the office. We we were hugely fortunate to have this commission awarded to us by a couple, Mitchell and Emily Rales, who were the brainchild of the Glenstone Foundation. And they presented to us a very unique program. They wanted 12 rooms, 9 of them in perpetuity with either one artist or one work. The other 3 would be a little more flexible, but not just open, flexible rooms like one would find today, but these very particular rooms. And they, in the very beginning, they only wanted 100 people to attend this, to come to this museum in a day, so that you could be in a room with only a couple of people, or in the room by yourself, and have this experience with these works. And so this was one of the first works that we looked at. This is Ed Reinhardt looking at one of his pictures. And his work is remarkable. He makes these, most of them are black canvases. And then he puts a figure inside the black canvas. And this black canvas, usually it has a slightly different texture of black paint. Or it has the slightest color of red in that. In other words, if you read about his work, he wanted you to put in the time to feel the work. He wanted it to be this experience of being a part of this work, because you had to be there and look at it and adjust. And so our site was in this beautiful field about 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. And when John Benner, a member of the office, went out to one of the first site visits we made, he put these pictures together and he just clipped out this one little landscape square here. And it began to remind us about how when you frame the landscape, it begins to heighten your experience with the land and the light. That when you frame something, it heightens that experience. And so before we knew what we were doing at all here, we just began to make these images, and we made models of how to frame the landscape. How do we deal with putting this work of architecture out in the landscape and beginning to heighten the experience of people, of us, moving through the landscape, moving through these rooms, framing the landscape and beginning to have that special experience with the landscape and the light. And so here's the final site plan, and you park way up in the upper left corner, those 3 parking lots there, and you leave your car behind, you leave your big gulp Coke behind, and you move to that little white building there, and that little white building is the place where you get oriented. There's a little bookstore there. And from there you walk. And you walk on that kind of serpentine path around a knoll. And you begin to feel the landscape. We looked at so many precedents. Japanese gardens, Japanese temples, where you move through the land and the day begins to drop away. Your body's moving, your legs, your arms, the light's changing. The worries of the day begin to drop away. And you're walking through the landscape and you begin to prepare yourself for the work. And so the next thing we did is we put these cluster of buildings here in the place where others had been. This was the one place where there was a peninsula of land with a series of barns on it. And we wanted to build where others had built, leave the rest of the site alone. And then we wanted to just simply take a journey around this peninsula with all of the rooms, so that these rooms would sit on the edge of this landform. We had already removed the bookstore. We then removed the cafe, and we put the cafe down here. Those are both timber buildings, wood buildings. And so we got the food, the cheeseburgers, and we got the books out of the experience of the art. This is the view as you're beginning to come around the path of these buildings, kind of setting back into this peninsula of land. And so you slowly, around these knolls, around these landforms, you begin to see these works, these kind of vitrines, if you will, of with containing these works of art. Because all of the works have their own artist, their own integrity, they have their own size, their own proportion. We wanted each individual room to be about those works. And we wanted the light that comes to be very particular, the views out to be particular. So in order to honor these 11 rooms, 12 rooms, 11 rooms, we wanted to then pull them apart to honor them, put them in their individual vitrine with their light, and then softly set them into this knoll. So that trying to join the landscape, the architecture, the light with the art. And so when you come to the end of the path, there you can see that you land right here, up above. Then you come into this entrance, and then you go down into the landscape. You begin to kind of submerge into these rooms. You can see there's the cafe. We have our loading dock building that's right here, which is the staff entrance, and it's the loading dock there. And you can see these individual buildings as they're beginning to line themselves up around this court. And then you see, as you come down the stairs, you begin to experience this pool of water, this green garden pool. And then you take off and you begin to walk around this pool, going into and out of each one of these individual rooms. This one is a flexible room. It's the largest room that can change. But then all of these others are very special parts of the collection with one work. And so each time you go into a room, some rooms have this view, but then you come back and there's a bench there. And you always have this moment of sitting there with this water garden and collecting yourself. So you always have time and distance to prepare yourself again to see these works in these individual rooms. You can see some of them have thickened walls, some of them have unique ways of getting into each one of these rooms depending on where they are. And it looks like we kind of move them back and forth with some idea about what the massing would be on the peninsula. But we really were moving them back and forth to begin to experience, to enrich the experience in this passage in between them. And I'll show you some studies of studying light and shade and shadow and the experience with this water garden to make that. So that was what really determined the composition of these rooms. These are the offices in the library. The curators wanted to be very close to the art storage, which was right downstairs, and they wanted to be very close to the collections, but you really don't know they're there. You're walking on top of them, and they're looking out over this garden that has this Michael Heiser work. And we looked for a long time at Riangy, one of our favorite places where I don't think cars were around, but now you have to park and you have to walk to this place. And what they took away here was the view to the horizon line. And you sit and you look at the light and you look at the landscape. Uh-oh. I am the worst at this. Is this a touchscreen? Nope. I think somebody needs help. I was born in 1953. There you go. Thank you. And they're open to the sky and the light. These are some of the models that we built. We constantly tuned this model for years, trying to get the site and this topography with these pavilions to be copacetic. We were all constantly tuning the size of these pavilions here as we were collaborating with the artist. So it was a real back and forth there. This topography was a rich topography as we looked at it in model form and on the site. And then each one of these rooms we worked on with the artist. This one happens to be on Carrara. We talked about, again, this room is 45 feet plus another 12 feet to the source of light. And it's a room that's about 24 feet square. And his date paintings sit at the bottom of that. So the light, we all talked about the light here having a long distance to fall and being very soft against his pictures. And then we started making, along with the models, we started making these drawings of the peninsula with these buildings, with these pavilions, these vitrines on it. And I used to love these images that Steve Oles made with Ian Pei's office back in the 50s, 60s, and he would make them with charcoal, and John Benner figured out a way to do that on the computer. And so we made a ton of these that have the atmosphere that we were trying to capture during the conceptual phase of this, that had this kind of grayness, this kind of copacetic relationship to the landscape. It's hard to know where we actually found this moment through these Steve Oles drawings, but very monochromatic as a way of trying to understand what we were trying to make here. But the landscape is moving, and we're placing these buildings in this topography. So this is right at the front door when you arrive, this remarkable Lawrence Weiner picture. He was here for the inauguration. He just recently passed away. So we're fortunate to have this piece as you come through the front door. And as you come into the front door, you're immediately engaged with daylight here. That's a beautiful ley light system that's up at the top. The light is coming down, and so you move towards the light, and then you begin to turn, and you then just simply follow the light. And you follow the light down the stairs here, and the light there is also a ley light system, softens the light as you move down this stair, and you begin to move to the collections. And each one of these rooms, this happens to be Bryce Martin's room, it has this lantern of light that comes in. We worked on the proportion of this room with him. And like we did with North Carolina, we have made these little 1-inch slots up at the ceiling, and that's where all the air comes out of. And then we made these little 1-inch slots at the base. That's where the return air came out of. We worked with the authorities to make sure that the exit signs were as simple and as lawful along with the cameras that were in here. We wanted to remove as many distractions as we could find, so that when you arrived in these rooms, it was this Ad Reinhardt experience, that you come and you simply get lost in the work. Here's Cy Twombly. We were so fortunate to work on this room before he passed away. These sculptures that he worked on over a 30-year period were here. He loved them. They sat in his Blacksburg, Virginia studio for years and years. They had dust on them. They were beloved. And they sit in this room, and here we wanted to push the light again to the floor. These were actually really difficult concrete pours to make, because they have a ceiling that comes, and that concrete ceiling turns up. And you can imagine the pressure of the concrete coming down as you're pouring that wall and also pouring the slab. That bottom wants to kick out. And somehow these folks understood all of the forces in the forms. This is remarkable concrete here by the contractor. This is Michael Heiser in an outdoor room. We worked on this room with him. I can't believe the authorities let us take people out here. I'm not sure my insurance company knows about that. But they're allowed to come out here. They have certain protocols with the docent. Michael Heiser, the size of the room, the height of the wall. This is a remarkable work. And there it is in its conceptual form when we began to work with him. This is the Pape in one of the rooms that happens to one of the temporary rooms. This is a cubic room, kind of the Renaissance cube here with a cubic oculus here in the ceiling that lets all the light fall on the walls here. And just a wall section to show you, this room happens to sit in the pool of water. You can see the height of the oculus and the ley light and the skylight, and the way the skylight is operable so you can maintain it. We have artificial lights up there. We have tracks down to the bottom. This light was also hugely studied with mock-ups and models, so we could tune this light. And it just so happens that over Arup, we were given a yearly budget of light, number of foot candles, so that when people are not in attendance here, they pull the shades so that it can be brighter on the days that these works are here. So Arup really tunes and enhances the experience of moving into these rooms and having this extraordinary daylight on these works without harming the works themselves. So here's one of the passages that you go through. You go through kind of a thickened wall into these rooms of light. And so here's what we focused on for years, about how to take these rooms and to make these experiences from the passages into these rooms of art, this kind of movement through light and shade and shadow. This Kantian notion that the shade and shadow belong to the light. They're not separated. And every day, the light and the shade and the shadow change. And so you move from the bright light next to the pool, you move then to shade, to shadow, then you move to shade, then you move to deep shade. This is going into the Bryce Martin room. And so every one of the rooms has this experience with daylight. And then you move into the rooms themselves that have this light. And so moving all along, we don't turn the lights on during the day, so everything that can be there is this daylight. And we started studying that on the computer as you're moving through it. This is the Charlie Ray room with these 3 big lanterns that sit in there. This is a wall section of the passage there to the left. The pool is there to the far left. Down here, with all of the gutters and all of that. This big, tall, 24-foot tall piece of glass here, and it's loaded with a green roof with all of its drainage. And then one of the lanterns that's in the gallery with all of its tracks and these kind of lanterns of light. Ronnie Horn's work, these works also hold the light and contain the light, these vitrines. This is on Carrara's room that is the 45-foot tall room that lets this light fall down further. This was one of the first sections that we drew. We simply, naively just cut this oculus in the top of the room as a way of starting the conversation about this really simple, almost ancient way of bringing in daylight. And in the very beginning, these passages were buried in the ground. This is way before the pool. And here are a couple of sections that we were beginning to sketch out, this kind of cubic room with its tall oculus, the on Carrara room that's much taller, with a much taller oculus there, a kind of cubic oculus, and the planting. And you can see how these rooms begin to get buried into the earth with the passage. Charlie Ray's room with their lanterns, the pool and the landscape, and then just a couple of completed pictures here. This is this lotus pool, this green garden pool that changes every season. It gets replanted, new things grow, old things grow from the season before. But this is the pool that you come back to every time. It's the one when you come into a room, you come back to it, and you have this experience of this room, this outdoor room with the light. And then here is this pause room, this place where you come halfway through the experience. It's a wood room. You come and you look out this large window as a place of silence, a place of calm, a place of preparation for the rest of the experience. And now to this thought of framing the landscape. Mies van der Rohe, in the Farnsworth house. I mean, who doesn't love this moment where you're framing the landscape with the roof and this floor? These two horizontal planes heighten the experience of the land. And here is this Glenstone room, this pause room with the Martin Purrier bench as a way of experiencing this kind of framed view of the land and this place to sit on the bench, have a breather, have some preparation so that you can get lost in the work beyond. And so here are some of the pictures, this kind of pool in the middle with these units. And then for a long time we were wondering what to make the buildings out of. And we began to look, after a long time, we began to focus on Carl Andre, who took ordinary materials. This is lumberyard wood here. And he took it from the lumberyard, he cut it precisely, and he stacked it precisely. And he took something that was ordinary and he made it extraordinary. And we wanted to try to do the same thing with concrete, where we wanted to discover the true nature of concrete. So we eliminated a ton of the additives that make concrete the same. And we found out that when you pour a block in the wintertime, it holds the moisture. And it's a darker block. When you pour it in the summertime, the moisture leaves it, it's a lighter block. And if you're lucky enough that it rains, as you're stripping the block, as the block is green, it streaks permanently. And so we learned all about concrete. And so this concrete was poured over 18, 20 months. So we had all kinds of temperature, humidity, summer, winter, fall, spring. And so we had a real tapestry. This is like a Walter de Maria installation here with all of these blocks, 25,000 blocks that were lined up there. Really, really a kind of an amazing sight. And their size, they're 6 feet tall, which is the kind of average size of most of us. They're 1 foot tall and 1 foot deep. They could be carried by this one particular crane and set on these little blocks. They have open joints. It's like a rain screen. And they're stacked in some places 70 feet tall. And so they're all load-bearing, and they're stacked. I mean, you know, you just hug the guy that was the superintendent of these folks. I can't find a joint, speaking of Kahn's Memorial, every single one of these joints is perfect. I don't know how this crew is amazing that did this. We worked with Pete Walker on this pool. They have these, we actually took this idea from Coller Scarpa's cemetery. Robert, I'm sure you know these ribs that are in the concrete here that form these removable trays so that you can remove a tray and change the planting, change the arrangement of the planting from season to season. And, you know, some of these little nooks and crannies in the pool get more light, they get less light, so they tune the garden here to the season, but they also tune it to the shape of this garden. I mean, it was a long exercise of getting this thing detailed. You can see the air is coming up in the detail to the right there at the base. We wanted the floor to simply drop away so that when you're standing there, you don't see the bottom mullion, but you look down and you see the pool. So we lowered that, and we have this shade pocket that's at the top there with this piece of stone, and this one piece of glass is simply epoxied to the frame up there. We have a shade pocket and all the things one needs to control the light over time. This is, you can see here clearly the ribs and all the moss that's beginning to grow at the bottom of these pools here. It's actually amazing. You can see on the southern side, this is kind of a living material, what we were hoping for. You know, the blocks are evening out a little bit in the sunlight. On the southern side, on the eastern side, not so much, although they are a little bit. On the western side, a little bit. But on the north side, they still have this kind of darkening there. And so concrete is this living material, which, you know, one other story about this. I mean, when we started to build these mock-ups and we started to see these blocks as they were coming out, and they started to lay these blocks, I got completely freaked out because they were really dark and they were really light, and they started to build this tower to the left. And all of a sudden, I thought this thing was going to look like a chessboard, you know? And I thought, what have we done here? You know, we're going to make this building that's really just completely noisy. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and, you know, said, you know, you've really got to trust this. You've got to trust that this is a living material. I'm not sure I slept well that night, but sooner or later, as the building started to go up, it affirms your belief that if you kind of follow the process and you believe in the process and you believe in the material, that you can settle down. But boy, that was a really hard lesson to learn. And so now we move to another project that was life-changing for me. This project in Warsaw we've been working on now for 5 years or so. And these are two pictures that my great friend that just passed away, Harry Cobb, took back in 1947. Harry was at Harvard, and he went on a Fulbright. And he stayed in Poland. He was supposed to go on up to Scandinavia, but he stayed in Poland. And he stayed in Warsaw and began to take these pictures. And when I started going there 5 years ago, they had a show about a couple of years in. And Harry came to the opening. They showed these pictures. And Harry took, I don't know, there were a lot of them, 3 or 4 dozen. And the show was packed. And I was wondering why the show, they had never seen their city, these ruins, in color. They had seen them in black and white. They didn't have color film in 1947. And so seeing these works and seeing the way the Germans came through and bombed this city from within, and the Russians bombed this city, and Poland was just completely devastated. And so you see this one gift, speaking of something that's topical now, there's this tower that was built by Stalin as a gift to the Polish folks. And it was clearly a symbol of oppression. And you can see that there's just rubble all around this tower. And so then they slowly started. By 1955, Stalin began to replan the city and rebuild the city. That's the subway that's going on. And then this is the Palace of Culture. And the people of Warsaw have now adopted this Palace of Culture as their own. And these two institutions, this is a Museum of Modern Art and the Contemporary Theater in Warsaw, and they stick their finger in the eye of the government, of the people in charge here. And a couple of mayors ago, he wanted to move these two institutions out of the city. Just get them out. You can build the buildings, but get them out. There was such an uprising, and they're a culture of protest over there. They protested so much that the mayor had to put them in the center of the city and in the shadow of the Palace of Culture. So this is our site right here with all of its history. Kind of a remarkable thing. But in the meantime, there has been this kind of rising up of Europe, of modern Europe after the war. You know, there's Daniel Libeskind. They've got a lot of commercial architecture. And so we're kind of caught between this commercial architecture and this Palace of Culture that has a presence there and a memory and a history. And it is, in fact, the center of the city. Look at these soccer celebrations that they have. You think we celebrate Super Bowls here. This is really the center of the city. And so what are these two institutions? They are institutions. They're not filled with Bryce Martins and Jeff Koons and all of these works that are famous around the world and notable. And you go in museums and they're filled with these works. These are works from them. These are works that speak to their culture. Yes, they have a few from Germany, from Sweden, from Denmark, but their works are their voices, and their theater, these theatrical moments, are theirs. There's a long story behind this, but it's Monica's expression of her dissatisfaction with the rebuilding after the war, the replanning after the war. And so she took the frame of a building that she had researched carefully and she crushed it and painted it black. And so we started then looking at what these two buildings wanted to be. What is the atmosphere here? And we began to look first at the theater. These kind of, you have to go back to the black box. These blackened spaces where the actors and the sets and the lighting and the audience become the stars of the show and the rest drops away. And so we thought about making a building that has this darkness, has this shadow and shade and a little bit of light, but this shadow and shade and this darkness. And then we looked at the museum, that we wanted to also make a vitrine of light with these works, to celebrate these works of their time. This is one of the top floor rooms that gets the light of Warsaw in it. And so we began to shadow for these two buildings that would sit next door to one another, this idea of shadow and light. And so we started very simply to make these simple collages here. You can see we're kind of caught through the palace on the right and the commercial on the left. And we wanted to make these buildings pretty abstract so that they would not be commercial buildings, not be taken for commercial works, but they would also not be identified with the palace, that they were strong, permanent works of architecture. And so we began to settle on this white concrete, this permanent white concrete that was simple, very few gestures. And then this black steel from Gdansk that was also permanent and dark. And so here's some of the building that was, as we're just starting construction, these remarkable white concrete walls and this blackened steel there on the right. And then for the theater, the director here wanted this big space, the size of an airplane hangar. He wanted this room to participate in the life of the city. He didn't want this enclosed room. He wanted this room open to the city. So we put these enormous garage doors on it so that he could open these doors, and as they're building sets, you could walk through. He wanted to have performances where you could have people in the square and people inside watching the performance. He wanted people to be able to walk by or sit on the steps and watch makeup being applied. He wanted this room to participate in the life of the city. And we loved this. We loved this moment of this shadow, this darkness. We loved this Richard Serra book. He just stapled this piece of paper, this canvas, to the wall, and you can't find the corner in this bright room. That was a real teachable moment there. And then this Louise Nevelson here, and our reflected ceiling plan on the right, where everything is exposed. We have black ducks up there. We have all kinds of services that are lingering around. We don't have a hung ceiling. We have structure. We have all kinds of things up there. And we certainly looked at Louise Nevelson, and you just get lost in her work. It's just remarkable work. And we wanted to try to find that light and shade and shadow in these ceilings. There is the building as in its order. It's probably the most ordered side as it sits next to the palace. As we started to look at all of the people that are coming here and the way the buildings sit, it has this master plan down there. We had particular blocks we had to build within, particular heights. It matched the height of the palace. It had to have arcades. And then this museum. We wanted to find these kind of threshold spaces. And here on the ground floor, you can see that as you're coming in from the city, you see these porches that are here. And we wanted this porch to be this place that was a transition from the city into the building. These porches where you could have sliding glass doors that would open up to the city. And then on the second and third levels, you get these city rooms, a little bit like our pause rooms at Glenstone, where you come into these rooms and you have windows that open out to the city. So these blocks of galleries, as you move through, they're all different. And then you come to these places that are wood-lined again, and you have a bench to sit and watch to control this experience. And so then the facades begin to speak about these rooms inside, these framed views. There's the library in the middle with its window. There are the city rooms. There's a terrace up there up top. And so it speaks about the kind of pause places in the project. You can see the arcade down there. It's lowered down to an 8'6" height. So you walk under this kind of plane, and then you come up and it's 7 meters inside that space. So that's a real spatial threshold from the city in there. And then again, trying to frame nature and heightening the experience, just like Glenstone here, or there's the library on the left, the city room on the right, as a way of getting your sense of orientation in the city and having a quiet moment. And then this stair that I'll show you a picture of. They've just worked on the construction of this stair. But this kind of palazzo stair that we love, having a stair that would have 2 ways up, or 1 way up and one way down, as it would go around, so that I'm sure you've been at a lot of museums where you have to go up an elevator, or you have to go up a back stair, or you have to have. We wanted to make this stair a social space, a space where people come together and meet others. And it's surrounded by this center of light as it's coming down, as a way to center all of the clusters of galleries around this social space. And so here's a rendering as you can see kind of the scale of it. It's monumental, and it's made out of this sense of permanence here that was hugely important to us. This building, we want this building to have a sense of a strong, heavy work that would elevate the art, the expression, these works inside. It would elevate their presence by having this strong architecture. The elevations are very simple, calling out these very particular rooms. That's the cinema tower, but you don't go up the tower. It's open, but you go down in the tower to the special cinema down below. But it's a marker that looks out towards the park. And so we looked at this like the house of rooms. You can see Glenstone there. Here, because of the zoning envelope, we had this house of rooms that we made. The director didn't want, again, flexible rooms. She wanted the curators to come in and have a particular size, particular height to come in and curate. Again, not kind of the American model of these big open rooms, but these very particular spaces to come in and curate there. And so you can see also the middle there that is the stair and the core, a little bit like Cy Twombly. And so here are some of the galleries. They're all different sizes and shapes and heights. These big beams up here are actually the structure for the building. We had to build this building over a subway, and so these enormous beams are not on a regular rhythm. They represent the rhythm of the subway below that we excavated to put down very particular columns. And so they represent the way the building is held up, and then these slimmer beams stabilize those and hold all of the skylights above. Here's the section through the building. You can see the facade extending down. It's built over the subway. Very complicated. It took a year for us to get out of the ground. You can see the light on the +1 floor there, these clear story lights, and then the top floor is completely lit. Very tall, very large rooms. We made these wood models to study these rooms forever. These big beams that represent this rhythm of the structure as it's going through. This one top floor room that is an enormous, enormous gallery there that's about, I don't know, 15 meters square, something like that, and about 8 meters tall. And this really celebrates these works, frames these works, celebrates these works in the light, and elevates their presence in this time. And then these are the galleries on the +1 floor, softer clear story light that's coming in through this clear story, but very quiet rooms. And then these two buildings as they come together around the forum. And then here are a couple of construction pictures. There's the cinema tower there on the left. As an architect, I go up and I hug the concrete foreman every time I visit. This concrete is amazing. His name is Rafa, and he knows when I arrive on the site after I get off the plane that I'm coming to hug him now. It was a little embarrassing in the beginning, but if he continues to make concrete like that, he's going to have another year of hugs. And then look at this stair he poured out of white concrete. That's a little bit of a wide-angle lens. It's a little distorted, but it shows you kind of what he can do there. Just completely thrilled with the quality of construction that we're getting over there. So that's it. And these are the people, by the way, that make it happen. Thank you very much. Do you want to take questions or?
Yeah, if you're willing to.
Sure.
Any questions?
It's all quiet. So.
I've got a,
Oh.
I can ask questions.
Yeah, sure.
You show a lot of images. Part of the challenge of being an architect is predicting the future, right? So you're trying to predict what's going to happen. The phenomenology of light is not as easy as you make it seem. But I think you help to show some of that process. So maybe a little bit more about when you first started the project, because you showed some nice drawings and trying to understand how the light works, but then how do you really feel confident that it's going to work the way you want it to?
Well, you never feel wholly confident, and you like to be on edge like that. As a younger architect, we would arrive at something and stop. We had a client was leaning on us, or you would arrive at something and you'd stop and you'd draw it. I think the more mature the office has gotten, we just continue to work. And that's been a hard lesson, and it's a really difficult lesson to learn. We constantly start with light as a part of the experience. We then begin to build models. We begin to work with OVARP. And we get as confident as we can with light. But if there's one surprising thing, there's one surprising thing that happens when the building opens. It is the light. It is completely unpredictable and not anything like you thought. I swear. You walk into a room and light is so astonishing, and you've looked at it so long in a model or in a drawing or you've looked at other buildings, you've been to Conn's Kimball, you've been all these places, and you've seen light, and so you try to, and all of a sudden, you work so hard for, a couple of years to conceive this thing, and then you watch it in construction. But then when the building opens, I'm just always astonished with how really beautiful it is. I'm kind of a light lover. I hug the light. And that is, I think, the one place where I don't think we've missed it. I mean, I can go back, I really beat myself up when I go to a project and we've opened it up. It's hard for me to celebrate until kind of years later, which is my wife, is not happy with that idea, that I'm unhappy, but that's what happens. But I'm not unhappy about the light. It is something that is just, it's like magic. Light is really, really amazing. Thank you for that, though. Yes. Hi there.
Thank you so much for the lecture. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the idea of these pause spaces. You talked about it in two different projects, and I was wondering, did it start as a client request? Was it something that you liked in another project and brought forward? I've never heard the concept before, but it's very interesting.
Well, it started when we were working on the Glenstone Museum, and we had these rooms that were walking around in the peninsula. And when I began to look at the works of art that they were beginning to curate these rooms with, they were pretty heady works. I mean, they were pretty activated works of art. You had to really experience them. And we started with this idea that you would go from room to room, but then you'd come back to the water garden, and you could sit on a bench. You'd have the time and distance to move from one to the next. But we thought the first 5 rooms were enough, that you needed a break, to be simple-minded about it. And you needed a break, you needed a pause, you needed a way to prepare yourself for the next 5 rooms. And so we started thinking that this is such an inwardly looking pool, where the windows that were looking out at the end of each galleries were, they're very thin and tall, they framed the landscape. But we thought of this room as a way then to reconnect with the land, because the land offers a heightened experience of the landscape, a heightened experience of the light, this enormous window there to frame it and to get you ready for these next moments. And so then we also thought of, when we got to Warsaw, we went to visit a lot of urban museums. And it was just like the center stair. Very few museums had this kind of social space in the middle. And very few museums had windows out, where you kind of looked outside and got your sense of the city and, participated in the life of the city. And so we thought as well that with each one of these clusters of galleries, that we needed a pretty small pause room so you could come and sit on a bench, look out at the city, and then get you prepared so that you could absorb this next series of rooms. And so it kind of began to be a way for us to heighten the experience of the works themselves. By the time you left that room, you could then get lost in the work. Yes, hi there.
Hi, you talked a lot about bringing light in, and I just wonder about your thoughts about emitting light out and what that means to the city, because I see a lot of the structures are quite solid blocks. So these calculated apertures, what does it mean for light to come out at those certain places?
I'm not sure I understand.
So you talk a lot about bringing light in.
Yep. You mean at night? Yeah, well, at night, at Glenstone, For instance, the whole center glows. In Warsaw, all of the apertures there glow, and those are all wood rooms, and so the kind of softness of those rooms, and the museum is quite big, and these big windows there begin to glow, and you begin to see people up in those rooms, and they begin to open themselves to the city. But maybe this is what you're driving at. I mean, the museum is a kind of inwardly looking experience, you know, and these 6 or 7 special places inside are places that are outwardly looking. But most of the experience is where you're in a room and you're getting lost in the work there, and they don't participate in the city. It's your experience with them, but then you move into these rooms and you have that experience of the park or the boulevard or the Palace of Culture, and you begin to relate back to the landmarks that you know, the place where you live. Thank you. Yes, hi there.
When you were working for Richard Meyer, what was the moment, or when was the moment that you decided to go out on your own?
Wow. You know, I was really, really fortunate to go to Rome for a year back in 1995. And, you know, I was pretty convinced I was going to come back there after I returned to the United States. But you just can't go to that place and come back and do the same thing. And so, you know, about 8 months in, I remember I told my wife that I was thinking about opening a firm, and we had our 2 little boys that were about yay tall. And she kind of looked at me and said, well, do you have any work? I mean, are you next going to announce that maybe you have a project? So she was a little freaked out, to say the least. And you know, this is why I love her. So you know, I started the practice. I sat in the back of the office. Well, I actually worked out my living room, which disrupted the family, to say the least. For the first 8 months, I rented a space and worked in that space for 6 months without a project, with nobody there. And then, you know, slowly it just started to happen. But there was a lot of, you know, I thought, well, you know, maybe I'll go back to work. You know, it's always a little touch and go. Always a little touch and go. Not easy. Thanks for asking that. Haven't thought about that look she gave me in back then. That was the look of desperation. Yes, hi.
Thank you for presenting all the projects. Beautiful, I love them all. And I have a question about the Museum. I'm curious about the different scale, the different type of the different rooms that the result of the over with the bodies, or is the result of the starting of the body?
Every one of those rooms were, except for the changing rooms, the ones that could take different pieces over time by different artists. But all of the ones with either one work or one artist were designed in collaboration with them, as long as they were living. There was one artist that was not alive, and so we worked with his wife and his kids there. But all of the others were proportioned with them. We reviewed the height, the width, the length, the materiality of those rooms, how much light came into those rooms. all of that was designed in complete collaboration with those artists, and that's a dream. You know, you think, well, maybe they're going to screw it up. No, they don't. They make it better. I mean, a lot of those conversations were just amazing for me. They really understand what they're doing, which was hugely like a confidence builder, and they also know how they want to have their work presented. You know, they're very opinionated about that. And off we go, but it was really fun. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.